we have to keep perspective, we have to keep proportion, and we have to be accurate.
For the church.
In a field that is complex.
And knowing this, kung mauni ilang problema kasi siyuda kay dili makaisipan sa stand, sa official stand sa archdiocese of Cebu. Nag-ibog kung anong siyuda kay mauna po media life.
Media practitioners sometimes think they have the right to know everything.
They tend to think in terms of weeks, etc. The guy says, but I've got a deadline in 5 hours.
But we in the church are involved in the care of souls.
Have to be reconciled. And I think the movement towards dialogue is understandable.
And this oftentimes requires confidentiality.
But we will need priests who understand the dynamics of media.
Distrust, irritation, if not some hostility. That's how press and church view each other on controversial issues involving the clergy. Neither side thinks the other is doing its job well in informing the public about alleged scandals involving priests. The church thinks the press is intrusive and impatient, knows little about church policy, structure, and procedure, blows up the crisis story out of proportion, doesn't get the facts right, accuses with little basis or evidence. The press thinks the church protects the priest, covers up the alleged scandal, or drags its feet as it helps the suspect weather the storm until the controversy dies down. Neither side is entirely right or entirely wrong. There is confusion, if not misunderstanding, about each other's job and motives, which largely explains the mutual distrust. Part of the solution is to identify problems and seek solutions. The CCPC, or Cebu Citizens Press Council, under its mandate of improving media standards and performance for community good in a series of studies and meetings, is helping to clear the air and close the gap. Both the church and the press play powerful roles. Listen to journalists on what the church does and can do.
Church say that they don't do so actively, but they do influence how policies are set. They do have an effect on what laws gain public support and what laws don't. For example, there was a recent case where the Archbishop spoke in a sermon in Mandaue about how the public should not, at least the Catholic public, should not support lawmakers who had supported or authored the reproductive health care bill. So even if the strict definition of that question is that they lead the flock in terms of what their spiritual beliefs should be and what practices they should follow in order to live an ethical or a moral life, in real terms, they have a far larger effect. They influence people's political decisions, and they also influence people's secular behavior.
I think one of its most important functions is to inspire and to give direction for people how to deal with challenges in life, how to deal with moral dilemmas, to give guidance basically. It's supposed to be the shepherd.
The church also recognizes the press as an instrument for good.
The media has a very significant role sa society kay the media informs, forms, educates people, and through this process they can have a very powerful influence in terms of the decisions that they make and the actions that they will take. No?
Very powerful priests, but very powerful for the media. As a matter of fact, Ateneo de Manila University survey 2001 it paints a picture that media is even more powerful now in terms of molding the minds of young people.
So it's supposed to be heralds of truth. Not only about being heralds of truth, it's also sometimes being interpreters of truth. The media is very powerful.
Importante ang media sa atong dili lads katabang sad sa community development media, sila sama sa bridge, tulay. There is always something that is being done to media practice. Kawawa naman. That was, I pray for you. But in the first place, we need you. Because we have, ours is to be able to preach the good news. And since the Lord has given us this instrument, why should we not use it?
They complement each other's work, in fact, but tension, even conflict, is inevitable. But is there a real and urgent crisis? What is the score on priests in trouble? Few are keeping count.
But what I did was, I did a Google search in the absence of a scientific survey, and I put the word erring priests. It's a Google search, 817. Of course, I didn't have time to look into all the who are these erring priests. I also did a search on some names. I will not mention them anymore. On some of some priests who may have hugged the limelight, especially in the last 2 years. Yeah, very interesting. Di man kayo daghan.
I remember talking with a Cebuano reporter, Maning Satori, who used to be with PNA. And Maning was again saying at the time, he said there were 5 priests in Cebu who were not living up to their obligations. I said, Maning, how many, have you ever thought how many priests there are in Cebu? He says, yeah, about 340. So 5 over 340. You compare that with 12 disciples over 1, not bad, no?
Whatever the number of actual cases of priests involving controversy, each case shakes the church and the rest of the community. One must understand why the press uses so much space and airtime to stories about priests in controversy.
Priests make good copy because they're like any other person in power. What even makes them more interesting is that while they wield a lot of power, they are not subject to the same rules of accountability and disclosure as any other person in power, such as politicians. So for that reason alone, they would be great copy.
Culture plays an important role. We value our religion so much, and we think so highly of our church officials. So I think when they do something that's off from when they do something that isn't expected of them, I think that's when we try to run after those stories, and because especially if it's something that is perceived to be immoral, they're supposed to be the model for morality and all that.
No one from the church questions the right of the press to report on alleged wrongdoings of priests. But basic complaint is what the church calls media's imprudence.
I would wish that media would be able to make the fine distinction between personal sins and criminal offense. Personal sins that do not constitute a criminal offense should not be reported as such. The church has its own procedures to address the first, and she is obliged to submit to the law of the land in regard to the second. In every case, the good name of a person is always precious to everyone concerned. And so I hope the media will be able to appreciate that.
Complaints are mostly on when and how the press reports the story. Gripes range from premature disclosure to sensationalism. When can media disclose the alleged offending priest's name? Identifying the priest prematurely can touch sensitive nerves.
Yes, it is the right of the press to present that there is this allegation made of a certain personality such as the priest. And since it is firstly in the level yet of being alleged, then with regards to the naming of the particular alleged personality, what we kind of look into is the principle of not imputing immediately what the person is being alleged as guilty, and so we delicately respect the person's dignity and honor his name, and so we do not name him immediately. However, when the complaint is filed already in the court, in the police, it is to these authorities that you can draw from the names. That
Should be considered as ordinary suspects of crimes. I mean, we could not name the suspects unless there are complainants or there is a formal case filed against them. So if there is a positive identification, whether he's a deacon, a priest, a monsignor, a bishop, he should be named because he is being accused of a crime and he should be answerable to that accusation.
See, we cannot divulge confidential matters, especially the matters that concerns the confessional.
There has to be some restraint when individual people in positions are actually named on the basis of an allegation, because the repercussions are tremendous. For priests, example, their only investment is their good name, and once an allegation has actually been brought, it's so hard to reverse everything. It's so hard. Unlike other people, they could run for another office, they could move to other towns, but an allegation, whether true or false, actually haunts a priest because his only basis for getting listeners is his reputation.
Because of studies by the Cebu Citizens Press Council, with journalists and priests sharing ideas, CCPC has recommended these standards. The priest is not named or identified until the complaint is filed with a prosecutor or court, or the church or religious group identifies him, or the side of the priest is secured from him or friends and parishioners or media by extensive inquiry is convinced there is probable cause and the complaint is not just rumor or poison item. But even when the priest is not yet named, the allegation by itself already hurts the church, and the press recognizes that.
The guidelines, I think, are reasonable. The information is not ultimately tied to the public, but I think it's because it takes into consideration the the role of the pastor or the imam or the priest. He must of credibility as a moral leader. We must be very careful in no way to compromise that by premature publicity. So I would feel that the rules that CPC is okay, fine. Ultimately, we do not deny once the case is filed for his court, then it's open.
As I've said, the priest is treated more carefully than most other public figures. Because we are aware that if we report about priests who have failed, then the effect is far larger than people refusing to take priests seriously. The view that gets tainted is their view of the entire church and not just that specific priest.
To sensationalize is to blow up a story to something bigger than its actual news value. Sensationalism is defined as the use of exciting stories or language at the expense of accuracy in order to provoke public interest or excitement. Are stories about priests sensationalized?
Don't believe that it's sensationalized. It just so happened that last year there was a series of events involving priests that were covered by media. So much so look at it will impact sa society and sa clergy
I won't totally blame it on media because a lot of what has happened is also the church fault. Not exactly the church, but perhaps the significant members of the church who is supposed to be handling whatever problems the church is being focused on. So again, I can say I complain about the church being focused, but maybe in general there seems to be a culture of sensationalism Not only about the church, but among other things. Isa lang ang church.
Why? It's part of human nature to desire to attract a greater share of patrons. Now, I do not say media sensationalizes, but it is always a temptation. In a very competitive field, you have to offer a product that sells. That is why there is always need for self-regulation among media practitioners.
The press, too, has its complaints against the church, and many of them appear valid, even to the clergy. There's the difficulty of getting the side of the alleged offending priest in the church.
Definitely. I would say it's the most difficult beat to cover because there are more, what do you call this? They're more evasive on issues, especially involving priests. So they have a tendency not to answer your questions or not to even give a statement, which is like, if you're a journalist, you have to get their side, or else your story won't see print, or you'd be called biased or something like that.
Yes, I think murag they have the tendency kanang dili na lang bitaw motubag, i-ignore na lang ang issue, kanang let it die na lang.
Because the people nga akong naay connection sa aning mga sensitive cases kay kanang dili mutubag sa mga